Okay, so we've come to the end of this DVD pretty much. This is the last modeling chapter. And what I'm going to hit on here is a pretty major topic in 3ds Max and most 3D packages, and that's the topic of proceduralism. I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail here. It's a pretty complex topic, and we have an entire DVD dedicated to it. It's our second workflow DVD, which is titled Proceduralism. So if you want to find out more about this, then please watch that DVD, as it gives a really thorough explanation of proceduralism and the implications of it and so on. But what I'm going to do in this chapter, I'm going to model one part of this go-kart using a procedural technique, and it'll give you an insight into why it's such a useful technique to use in your workflow wherever you can. When you model things procedurally, you effectively make things smart, and that means that effectively the model or the rig can adapt to changes that you make. So say, for instance, you're modeling a building and the architect has a change of design, or maybe there's a regulation change that they need for a certain country. Well, to a certain extent, with procedural modeling, you can actually have it so that you can just change one value somewhere, and that will then basically cascade throughout the entire model and change everything. That would be a pretty extreme example, but I'm just going to show you a simpler one here. So what I want to do is I want to create some springs for the seat that you can see here. At the moment, it's kind of floating in mid-air, and obviously we can't have that. And I thought that maybe it would be a good thing that, you know, the driver of this car would have some springs so that when he goes over some bumps, you know, he's cushioned to a certain extent. So to do that, I'm going to create these springs in a procedural manner. And that means that, as an example, if I wanted to animate the seat, the springs would then change shape based on those changes. Or if I wanted to remodel the chair slightly, then again, the springs could adapt. Now, it's not going to be completely robust. If you made major changes to the chair, probably the springs would have to be remodeled, but you can kind of get an idea of the limitations here. So if I click on this chair and I turn off isoline display, you can see that we have a pretty dense mesh actually. And I'm going to run selections of these edges across here to create the springs. It's going to require some hand editing as well, but basically we're going to create the majority of the spring from just, you know, using these edges that we have here in existence. And then we're going to use a procedural technique to actually produce the spring itself. So anyway, what we need to do first is we need to create a copy of this seat. So I'm going to hold on shift and just move it just by clicking. We haven't actually moved it anywhere, but Max picks it up as a move and allows you to then choose these options. If we copy the seat, we'd end up with a copy of the seat. They'd be independent of the original seat. If you change the original seat, the copy wouldn't change. So we don't really want that. If we chose an instance, then any changes to the copy, the new seat, would be passed on to the original seat. And also any changes on the original seat would be passed on to the new seat. They'd be instances of each other, so that wouldn't be very useful to us here. So what I want to do is I want to take this seat that we have and make a copy of it. But I want that copy to then be effectively unique from the point that we copy it from, so that it can branch off and have changes made to it. But those changes will have the underlying structure of the seat built in. And for that, we want to use a reference. So we'll just say reference here. And I'm going to call this seat springs. Say OK. And we now have that selected. So I'm just going to select the original seat. And I'm going to go into display here. And I'm going to say display as a box. That's just basically to make this a bit easier to work with. I'm going to click on seat springs. What we need to do now is actually just select the springs and create them. So I'm going to use an edit poly modifier for this. So let's just go put an edit poly modifier on. And now we just need to go in here and select the runs of edges that we want to be springs. So I'm going to have, let's say, one here. So select this edge here. I'll use ignore back facing to make sure that we don't actually select the edges at the back of the seat. That's pretty thin there, so maybe we'll just select one more edge. I'm going to select an edge here in the middle, which is going to be the middle spring. And then at the back of the seat here, I'm going to select two more. Let me just make this a little bit darker because it's actually quite hard to see what's going on here. That's better. So let me just select, this is going to support sort of downward pressure. So we'll go here, here, and these are actually quite large, aren't they? So we'll go for 3 edges here. Keep this, keep the same kind of thickness of the springs. And then we want to have 2 more, I think, at the back, just support the back of the seat. So I'll have one up the top here. So let's go for here and here, and we'll go for one lower down here. So go for that, that, and that. That looks pretty good. So we can now just use a ring selection to go all the way around. We can now convert this into a poly selection just by holding down Control and clicking on polys. And I want to invert the selection now, so I basically have all the other polys selected. So I can use Edit, Select Invert, and use Control I to do that, keyboard shortcut. Now that I have all the polys that I don't want selected, I can press Delete to get rid of those. Now we're left with basically our springs. So what I want to do now is I want to get rid of these faces on the inside here. And I think the easiest way to do that is to select the middle edge here. So I think the easiest way to do this is probably to, actually it could be to turn, keep ignore back faces on and have this option on here, window crossing. So now I can just basically draw a little window around the central edge here, and it should, nope, that didn't quite work because we're not in edge mode. So let's just turn on edges, deselect, and just select the central edge there. Yeah, we got that. And then we can actually still see these front edges here as well. So I'm going to hold down Control, drag around here, and just select those as well. Okay, now I've got these central edges, which may not be particularly interesting, but if I now grow the selection, you can see that I can now grow the selection outwards. So I'm just going to keep on doing this until we get around the sort of the edge here. So we get around the corner. And I want to erode this until I get basically down to about here. Let's just keep on growing it. Going around the edge now. And I want to make sure that down here I don't erode it too much. So let's keep an eye on this down here. That's pretty good. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually get these edges here. I'm going to extend them and make them into a spring that comes down onto here. So we don't want to go too far away, but we probably want to go a little bit further in. So look at that. Yeah, that would be pretty cool if we have this curve in here. So, and that's pretty good there as well. We can probably now delete these edges. If I just change it to a poly selection again, Control, and then just delete. So now we have the basics of our springs. We have these straps here, and I'm just going to erode these in a little bit further. So I'm just going to select these 2 polys here, same here, and then just grow it inwards again. This needs to go in further because obviously we need for it to go from here and then sort of curve inwards. So we'll just grow this a little bit more. It's cool. Actually, let me just undo that. There we are. We can just delete that. We'll do the same thing here as well. Let's just grow this in. Select some polys. Get rid of those. Okay, so now we've trimmed these down to what we want them to be. So now what I want to do is I just want to create some edges that allow me to basically extend these straps onto the frame. So to do that, we need to just select the edges at the end of each spring. So let's just do that. Actually, probably the easiest way to do this is just by dragging like this, actually. Because we've got the selection in window crossing, which makes it easy to do this kind of selection. We can just do that. Now, I'm not sure if we can actually do a scale of edges. We'll have to see if that works, but if not, we'll have to do each side individually, but let's just give it a quick try here. Okay, so let me now use a shared pivot point, and let's try scaling outwards, holding down shift. Yeah, that actually works. So let's just do that. Okay, by holding down shift and scaling, it's actually extruded out these edges here. So we don't want to do it too much, so let's do it from this angle. Just want to make sure that we get just to about here, I think. Yeah, that's pretty cool. And then we just want to, I think those look pretty good actually. So let's just get rid of that. Deselected those edges. Let's just scale these out a little bit further. And deselect those. And we need to keep these going out a bit further again. So scale, scale, scale. Yeah. Deselect those. Just a little bit more. Okay, that's pretty cool. And now I just want to move these slightly. I'm going to adjust their position. There we are. Same thing here. Let's just select this and this. I'll just move this down into position. There we are. So it kind of makes contact with the frame. If you can see that there. And we're going to do the same thing here. We need to bring these so that they actually make contact with the frame. So let's just select these edges. Do the same thing over here. And then we'll just pull it down into position. There we go. We can kind of finesse this later. You know, I'm just going to show you the basics of it here. Now you can see we've actually got a problem here. We've got some erroneous edges selected here. Well, we can just fix that later actually. So let me just redo that again. And then we'll just get these edges and move those back into position by hand. There we are, almost right. There we go. Kind of got that back into position. Okay, so we've basically got the springs there in position. Now, what I need to do is just put in some subdivs here. So let's just do that. We need to change to this mode so I can do this kind of selection. So let's just do all those. And then I'm going to do a connect. One connection, that's okay. Turn on edge constraint. And we're just going to move this in slightly till it's kind of over the here. And then I'm going to just move this down until we flatten this. Oops, we need to turn off edge constraint at this point, because obviously it's going to constrain the edges. Move this down until it's kind of flat. Let me just undo that. Just get rid of that selection. Undo that. There we are. You can see this middle one's been pulled down too far, so the one size does not fit all in this case. And I'm just going to make some vertex modifications here, because you can see this is a little bit lopsided. So I think we need to get a bit more accurate here. There you go. So we'll just select these vertices and pull this up slightly. There you go. We won't get too accurate with this because I'm just really trying to show you the basics of the whole sort of procedural thing here. So let's not get too caught up with the exact positioning of everything. So Need to make some adjustments to this one. And this is actually quite laggy. It's quite slow to model with, and the reason for that is that you've got this entire stack of modifiers below it, which is actually making things a little bit slow here. But the end result is worth it. You'll see. Okay, let's just move that up a little bit. There we go. Okay, and then let's do the same thing on this side. Probably the easiest way to do this actually is show you this in wireframe. Quickest way to do this is select all of the vertices, do a scale, make sure they're using a shared pivot point use selection center, and then scale on Y, and that'll actually scale them so they all share the same position in Y. And we can then move it up to here, up to the edge here, go in perspective mode. We'll do the same thing in Z, R, scale, make sure they all sit on the same plane, scale this a few times, and then move them up. And they're just sitting above. Select these edges, connect them. See if it's done that. Nope. Not quite getting that right there. That's why we haven't got the actual center edges selected. So let's just select from this direction. Connect. Okay. Move over. So it's now sitting over here. Now, again, scale on Z. So they all share the same position on Z. And now we can just move those down. There we are. Okay. So let's do the same thing for the springs up here. Just make sure we get those right. We'll look at that in wireframe. Not looking too bad. This one's looking a bit ropey actually. So let's try and fix that up. All we need to do here is do a Y scale. So we flatten this slightly. There we are. Same here. There we are. And then we can just move this out slightly into position. And now let's just put some connections in here. There we go. And we'll just move this back now until we get a bit more kind of flat thing going on. Looks okay. So before we go any further, I'm going to show you the next stage with this, because to a certain extent finessing this comes into play when we actually do the next stage. And what we're going to do now is we're going to give these all some thickness. So I'm going to select all of the polys by using Control A, and then I'm going to flip all their normals so they're facing the other direction. And then I'm going to come out of sub-object mode and I'm going to put another modifier on here. And I don't know if you can guess which one it's going to be. Yes, that's right. It's going to be shell. So there we go. We've given the spring some thickness, and at the moment it's going upwards. But we actually wanted to go in the opposite direction. So let me just change that to 0. Change this to the opposite direction. And you saw there that those were pretty thick. So I'm going to use 0.5. Going down in the opposite direction. So it's going downwards now. And you can see that the positions that I've placed these on here now mean that these intersect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just go back down in the stack, show end results still on, go into sub-object mode, just grab these vertices and move them up. And just make an adjustment. There we are. We're into position there. That's great. And then do the same thing over here. You can see these are actually a little bit messy, so we'll just neaten these up while we're at it. So let me just ignore back facing, turn off. Select that. Do a scale. Neaten things up there a little bit. Pull it over a bit here. Again, scale. Move it over. And now we can just pull these up. So they're kind of sitting on the surface a bit better. There you go. Move this down. And then check it up here. Yeah, we got the same thing here. We just need to put in subdivisions here. Don't forget the geometry, the thickness doesn't exist at this point, so we're only working on the original mesh. So all of these polys here don't actually exist, so I can show you that by just turning that off. They get added later by the shell modifier, so I'm just going to connect this here. And now I'm going to, I think this is actually pretty much in the right position. It's just this needs to be pulled out slightly. Just pull this out till it's sitting on the surface better. Push this in so it's intersecting there, isn't it? So I think it's fine there actually. That's fine. Same thing here. It's kind of in the right position. We just need to pull this out slightly. Yeah. Same deal here. Pull it out slightly. There you go. As you can see, a case of, adjusting it. Same thing over here. Pull it out until we get these vertices sitting on the surface. Same thing there. Okay, so there's our springs. Now they're a little bit crude in this area, so what we're going to do is that we're going to go to the top of the stack. We're going to put a turbo smooth on. We're going to end up some pretty dense geometry here. So there you go, there's our springs. It's looking a little bit rounded at the edges there. So what we'll do is we'll just go back down here, go into the edit poly, and we'll turn off show end result. And what we'll just do is just connect some more connections in here and then just move them along to give ourselves turn on edge constraint. We'll just pull this up to the edge here. Now if we show end result, you can see we've got a harder edge there. We just need to do the same thing up here. Pull it along right up to the edge there. Same here. We can do all three of these at once, I think. We just get this angle right. Yeah, there you go. Connect. Move over. Great. Okay, and there we are. So there we have our springs. Pretty cool, eh? Well, you might be thinking, well, what's the fuss at this point? You could have done that maybe by other methods. And, well, the really cool thing about this is these match perfectly the contours of the actual seat itself. If we show the seat, let me just turn down the turbo smooth on this. It's obviously, it'll look good at render time, but we can just turn it off in the viewport for now. If I show you the seat here, we have to keep this turbo smooth on because this feeds into the geometry of this, and these faces wouldn't exist if it wasn't for this turbo smooth. So we have to leave that on for now. So let's change this back to not display as a box. So if you have a look at the back here, you can see that this spring lies nicely against the back of the seat. So it's a nice piece of modeling. You know, it matches exactly where the seat is. But the really clever thing is this. If we go into this model and just click on the seat, come down here to the edit poly and show end result. I'm just going to grab here. Okay, let me just say turbo smooth isoline display. Actually, that can't be done at that point because it needs to be passed on. So we need to keep isoline display turned off. So editable poly, and go in here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to just grab some of these verts here and pull them around a bit, and you can kind of get an idea of where the proceduralism comes in. If we get those verts and we pull it up, you can see that the spring underneath is actually moving as well. Can you see that? So you can see that the spring is being distorted along with the seat, as you can see. Pretty cool, huh? And that's because the end result of this stack gets passed on into this mesh's stack because it's a reference. And that means any changes you make to this mesh can have a knock-on effect and change this mesh also. You can see here that as I pull this around, the spring moves also, as you can see there. And that change is basically free. If we go up here, put turbo smooth back on here, that'll, you know, happen with turbo smooth on as well. It's all procedural. At each stage, the mesh is the result of all of the elements that we put on it. So we start off with an editable poly, we use symmetry, we use shell, we use turbo smooth. Then that gets branched off into this object. This object then uses this stack, but then uses some extra changes to it to produce this spring. So let me just show you that. So that with turbo smooth on, you can see I can just move this. And the spring is going to adapt to what I do here. You can see, same thing down here. As I said, I can grab the seat here and just move it around. And the spring is going to adapt. As you can see, it flexes. Now, it works pretty well there, but if you get too much deformation around here, as you can see, you get too much of a change in the kind of spring positions, and it looks a little bit strange. But you can see that if we wanted to make any kind of, you know, if we wanted the character to sit down here, you can actually rig this up so that as the character sits down, the springs get deformed underneath. Obviously, we probably wouldn't want quite that much flex, but as you can see, as I change the topology of the mesh, the springs adapt as they're based on the same geometry. Pretty cool, eh? And that's just a brief demonstration of procedural modeling. It's a difficult thing to explain, and as I said, we have an entire DVD on it, Workflow 2, Proceduralism. So definitely watch that DVD if this has whetted your appetite. Proceduralism is far-ranging. In this case, I've been using it for modeling, but it's also effectively the basis of character rigging in 3D as well. But you can use it in many different ways, and as you've seen here, it can be a very useful and powerful tool in modeling. So that's it for this chapter, and that's it for this DVD. In fact, that's it for this series. So let's wrap up now, and we'll have a quick conclusion.